Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Today we are on the 10th installment in my Project Poirot, which is where I am reading every single Hercule Poirot book in Agatha Christie's series, roughly in chronological order / order of publication-ish. So we're at the 10th book, which is 3-Act Tragedy. Now, I'm just going to tell you guys up front, I'm not sure how long this video will be because, I have so little to say about this because I did not enjoy this book very much, and especially coming off of Murder on the Orient Express, which I enjoyed so much. This was just a letdown, and I think I have some things to say about it in terms of how it fits into sort of the overall Christie oeuvre, but there is one thing in this book that just makes it something that I was never going to enjoy all that much. So if you've never seen one of these videos from me before, if you've not read the book, don't worry, I'm not going to get into any specific spoilers. I tend to kind of take a summary up through where the body is found, and then I sort of leave it there. So you can certainly keep watching if you've not read the book yet. And to be honest, I'm not sure I recommend you do because, like I said, I don't love this one. Anyway, 3-Act Tragedy is set in a remote sort of seaside town in England, in the house of a now retired actor named Charles Cartwright, I think. That sounds right. I'm pretty sure that's his name. I couldn't even be bothered to learn the names in this book, let's just put it that way. Anyway, he's retired, and he's somebody who kind of takes on a role wherever he goes. I mean, he's an actor by trade, but also essentially by disposition. So now that he has this seaside town, or seaside house, he is kind of taking on the role of the captain. His house is super modern, it has all these modern amenities, and it's been updated to sort of look like a boat. Anyway, it's a whole thing, and he's gonna have this big lavish weekend house party, and he invites a bunch of people, including Hercule Poirot. So at this dinner party, we meet some of his sort of industry friends, so a playwright and people like that, people who are friends of his from London. One of those people is Mr. Satterthwaite, I think that's how you say his name, who I believe shows up as somebody in maybe the Parker Pyne novels from Agatha Christie. I know he's a recurring character in other of her books, but I think this is his one and only appearance in the Poirot books. Anyway, he's invited to this party, and he's going to play a major part. There's also some local people who've been invited, including the town's reverend, some local nobility, which is Mrs. Lady Linton Gore and her daughter Hermione Linton Gore, who goes by Egg, and she's sort of a bright young thing, so she's there. And also, like I said, some of his older friends, including one named Sir Bartholomew, and he goes by Tolly. So all of them are together, and they're having cocktails, and lo and behold, the Reverend takes one drink out of his cocktail, and he keels over dead. So everybody, it's kind of shocking and surprising, and they kind of go into oh, what happened mode, and it's ultimately ruled to have been a natural death, but the host, the actor, Charles Cartwright, he is extremely suspicious, so is Egg. Hermione Linton Gore is also suspicious, and I think Poirot, his attitude is sort of on the fence. So there's a little bit of preliminary investigative stuff happening, largely without Poirot, but Mr. Satterthwaite is sort of he's our Hastings basically in this story, so we're seeing everything through his eyes, and he's talking to various people, and it quickly becomes apparent that this older actor fellow who's in his mid-40s is head over heels in love with this young girl who's 20, Hermione, Egg. He's in love with her, but he thinks that she loves somebody else, and Egg is trying to play hard to get him to like her better, and it's this whole misunderstanding, and he sort of throws his hands up and says, "I'm going away and I'm never coming back." And that's sort of how we kind of end the first part of the story. Cut to a few months later, lo and behold, Tolly, Sir Bartholomew, who was at this same dinner party as all of them, he also dies essentially under the same circumstances. So he just sort of keels over dead. And there's a few people who were at the first dinner party who were at the second dinner party, like Egg and her mom, and I forget who else, but a couple other people were also there. So she realizes the connection, she makes that connection, and she says, we've got to investigate, we got to do something. Meanwhile, when Mr. Satterthwaite hears about this, he is in the south of France, and he happens to run into the actor, Charles Cartwright, and Poirot, and they all sort of find out about this together, and they go back to London. And from there, basically, the rest of the book is mostly the actor, Mr. Satterthwaite, and Egg working together trying to figure out who done it. So going and interviewing all the household staff, including like the housekeeper and whatnot in Tolly's house. The only thing is that the butler who was working there at the time like flew the coop as soon as the murder happened. So that's suspicious, and they're not sure if he's dead or if he like did it, whatever. And the rest of the book is them, mostly the three of them, trying to solve it with some intervention from Poirot. Bottom line of why I don't like this book is that Poirot isn't in it enough. It's a Poirot book, and he's just like, he's not the main driver of action in this book. He is not the one doing most of the like deducing and whodunit-ing, and that's why I'm reading a Poirot book. Like, I want to hear from him. And the only other time this has kind of happened was in The Mystery of the Blue Train, where it wasn't focused that much on Poirot, and I just don't like it. Like, Mr. Satterthwaite is fine, like, he's fine, but I don't want to read a whole book about him. I don't like the actor at all, like, hate him pretty much from like the start. I didn't like him. I didn't find him charming. I wasn't into him. And I do like Egg. I mean, I liked her, and she, like I mentioned in the last video, how I kind of realized that Agatha Christie has a type, like a Mary Debenham type that comes up in all of her books. In this book, Egg is that type. She is smart. She is fallen on hard times. Like, her and her mother need her to marry relatively well to kind of preserve their place in society. But she, you know, she's fine. She's fun. I always like that character in the stories, but she's not compelling enough to kind of make the whole story work, at least for me. So in terms of like, do I recommend this? Do I not recommend you reading this? I don't like this one, and I probably wouldn't recommend someone reading it. That being said, it's a completely, like, it's not a badly written book. I don't think it has problems in terms of, for instance, The Mystery of the Blue Train. I think that book fundamentally had problems with it. This is not the case for Three-Act Tragedy. It is very solidly structured. I think the whodunit and how the mechanics of it work out is predictable if you've read enough Agatha Christie. Like, she's using one of her, like, go-to ploys, but it's not. I think that it's a fun mystery. It's a fair mystery. I believe you pretty much have every clue you need to figure out who did it, and I think that it's not that there's anything wrong with it. I just personally didn't like it. That aside, let's just talk about kind of like some overall themes. So again, like I said, there's the continuation of this sort of bright young thing, heroine, or kind of like main female character who is in this book, and I liked her, and that's something that happens pretty much in a lot of her books, and I usually like this character. So it's interesting to see how that character changes a little bit over time. Like, as the years go on, I'm thinking about a future iteration of this character who I find extremely interesting, and as compared to the 20s, with now we're in the 30s, I think that the gaiety and sort of frivolity of that character is diminished, and I think that that's directly reflective of the fact that it is set in the 30s, where this sort of like global depression is on. Another theme that's coming up is acting. Like, I don't think I ever really internalized how many of Agatha Christie's books involve actors in key roles, but this is like the second, third, fourth one of those where a main actor is a huge part of the plot and one of the main characters. So I think that's a theme, and it's, again, interesting. I would say that this is a book where the actor is very it's actually, you know what, now that I'm kind of saying this out loud, this book is very similar in a lot of ways to Lord Edgeware Dies, and Charles Cartwright is characterized in terms of who his character is and his sort of psychology is very similar to Lady Edgeware in that book. He's an actor because it's his only real route to empathizing with other people, I think, as opposed to, because like he's unable to do that without acting, basically, and I think that's sort of a character flaw, or is meant to be, as opposed to, there's also actors portrayed in Christie who are essentially so deeply empathetic and like connected with other people that that's sort of the source of their acting. This is a situation in which you need acting to be able to help you connect to other people, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to. So that is definitely something that we've now seen in a few of her books, and I think that that's present in this one as well. We do have a very interesting sort of allusion to communism in this book. So like I mentioned, Charles Cartwright is pursuing Egg, and his sort of competition for her is a local guy who has inherited a bunch of his uncle's money, but he's also a communist, so that like creates some interesting tension. And it's just interesting to hear how Agatha Christie kind of talks about communism. So I mean, I'm too young to really have sort of like an emotional reaction to communists in terms of like, scary, like communists are terrible, whatever, but like there's a very large part, actually, I mean, realistically, the reason Hitler was able to do what he did was because people sort of felt like, oh, it's better to have a fascist than a communist. I mean, like, there was a real fear of communism in this period of history. There was a feeling that it was sort of like unstoppable and spreading, and there was a lot of phobia around that. So it's an interesting window because there's sort of, I mean, even China these days is basically like essentially capitalism with like a new Soviet flair, or a new like socialist flair. Like there's not a lot of like pure communism happening these days. Most of it has pretty much morphed into fascism. But back then there was some more like actual like ideological communists. And I want to say in Europe still, any of my European viewers, let me know. I think it's maybe even to this day, communism is more of a thing just because socialism is more of a thing in Europe. Anyway, all that to say, I mean, it's always interesting to see kind of Christie's working in contemporary like political or social issues into her books, and I think that that is clearly what's happening with that particular character. This is also another interesting book in terms of Christie sort of showing off her knowledge of poisons. If you'll recall, during World War I, she was essentially sort of like a pharmacist in kind of army hospitals, so she has a really deep and very technical understanding of how poisons work, and she likes to kind of show that off in some of her books. So I thought that was interesting as well, to kind of, it's an interesting poison that she uses as sort of the method of murder. And anyway, just a side note, I found that interesting. But honestly, aside from that, guys, I really just can't be bothered to care about this book. Maybe it is dismissive because I do think it's well written. I think she doesn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls that she has in some of the other books that we've read so far that I didn't love, but I personally was put off of this one. It just wasn't a favorite of mine, and it's not one I would particularly recommend. In terms of ranking, I would put this, honestly, the only one I've disliked more up to this point is the Mystery of the Blue Train. I don't care for this one, so I'm putting it pretty close to the bottom, and I expect that it will stay towards the bottom throughout this project. So that's my thought on 3-Act Tragedy. Sorry, it was sort of a negative Nancy video. You can't love them all. I think she wrote something like 80 books. They can't all be winners, and that's fine. So this week happened to be one that I don't think is really a winner. But anyway, that being said, if you read this book, please let me know what you thought about it. Maybe you liked it better than I did. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box, and I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!